Hello. My name is Vince, and I am presenting on one of my favorite books in recent years, Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. I'll be doing a review as my digital storytelling project. Pardon my voice, I'm recovering from flu. Uh, yeah, so this project is going to explore the narrative through the lens of pre-colonial African heritage and the devastating impact of colonial intrusion on indigenous and social structures in Africa. So just a disclaimer, just to talk about like differing viewpoints and variations through Acevedo, his textbook. So only looking through this lens of Chinua Achebe's book, Things Fall Apart, you may also just like get a viewpoint of a single story that we talked about in class earlier, which is just that you read one story and it can give you just a total overgeneralization of uh, Igbo society, when it is in fact not that at all. Where the society in which Okonkwo lives in and the household that Okonkwo conducts, it's more of a sort of overgeneralization and sort of a misrepresentation of family culture and lineage. So just to break down any of those, it's important to preface that Achebe's writings tend to lean more on the vocal views against toxic masculinity, often using toxically masculine men as main characters of his stories, creating a problematic single story. For some, that most Igbo families are toxic patriarchies, while only a few, like Obiarika, which is the thinking man, who questions throughout the story of Things Fall Apart the clan's emphasis of violence and power. So while Things Fall Apart is written to counter colonial myths, analyzing only one work will inadvertently create a single story, like I said, uh, of pre-colonial families for toxic patriarchies, and Okonkwo's tragic archetype, which I will get into later in this presentation, as well as social balancing acts, which noted by Azevedo in his textbook that many pre-colonial African social systems were built on communal consensus and balance. Like in the Igbo concept of the mother is supreme and the power of the priestess cello demonstrate that spiritual and moral authority most often reside in the feminine. So, as a quick summary of the world of Umofia, we have beginning in the 19th century, pre-colonial Nigeria, specifically in the village of Umofia, far from being the primitive society described in colonial history books. Umofia is a deeply traditional and sophisticated society where social status is a meritocracy, in which men achieve prestige through ozo, which signifies wealth and power, and their achievements throughout life. However, it is also a world where hypermasculinity is valued greatly, often leaving the contributions of women overlooked. To continue the quick summary, our protagonist is Okonkwo, who is a powerful, wealthy, and physically dominant warrior who earned his Ozo title through strength. His daily life is driven by a fierce hatred of his father's perceived failures, leading to fatal flaws, an inability to accept, change and obsession with masculinity that often manifests as violence. His unraveling begins as the expansion of British colonialism in Nigeria, forcing a collision with his rigid worldview, leading to a tragic loss of identity and respect, and later on his own demise. So, as we move on to the middle of the story, we see the primary source of external conflict, which is the introduction of the Christian missionaries. This creates a socio-ideological battle between Okonkwo's traditionalistic desires and the prolific nature of the church. We see a clear division form between the two, those who resist and those who, notably his son, like to adapt against Okonkwo, who will choose to resist it. Uh, Nwoye, Okonkwo's son, convert he converts and breaks down Okonkwo's very foundation of power when he joins the church and leaves the household. So, moving on to social justice and colonial power, this transition marks the decay of traditional Igbo society as British legal systems overtake the Igbo. Imofia, a political and judicial system, this is a critical social justice issue where where village leaders are humiliated and arrested, and power shifts from communal consensus to colonial dictation. The setting of Okonkwo's home becomes unrecognizable as indigenous laws are silenced by foreign administration. So Achebe's narrative is vital to Africana studies because the events of Mofia reflect the accurate experiences of native Africans across the continent, where colonialism is widespread. These historical events led to a diaspora and displacement akin to the African American experience we have studied in this semester. The classic piece of literature remains a cornerstone of for understanding of how post-colonialism of the 19th century shaped Africa as we see today. To deepen the connection to our African Studies course, I applied the framework of African agency. By looking at the leaders of Mafia, we see a community actively choosing to defend their social justice systems. Furthermore, using Acevedo's textbook as a guide, I analyze how Mafia decentralized political structure represents just one facet of a vast diversity of pre-colonial African governance. This moves us away from the broad generalizations and allows us to see the novel as a specific study in the broader history of the Mafa and the resilience of African heritage. My personal takeaways center on the dangers of rigidity and the complexity of individual identity. Okonkwo's story illustrates that downfall often stems from an inability to adapt to inevitable change. Furthermore, the novel provides a nuanced view of colonialism, showing how it tore apart the social fabric and belief systems of indigenous people. Ultimately, it teaches that a history and personal actions are complex. Advocacy requires flexibility and empathy for the future to grow. Provided are my citations, and thank you for listening to my analysis of this book. Again, this is one of my favorite books I've read of all time. Uh, and I hope this analysis really gives you an interest in the book. And yeah, uh, my channel also does more of these illustrations, although they are private. Yeah. Thank you. Bye.